right. Hey, welcome back to the show. This is Scott Talks, and we're talking with Ryan Dusick from the original founding member of Maroon 5. He was here to talk about his story from rock star to therapist, which was really fascinating. He's also put it in his new book called Harder to Breathe. And I did want to tell you as we started off that Songs with Jane is one of my favorite Maroon 5. Like, it's grassroots kind of Maroon 5 to me.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's a little edgier, less poppier.
Sure.
And I really had no idea that you were a big part of the push of that until Laura started reading your book. And I also I want to say right off the bat, as far as music goes and rock and roll, I love garage started bands, like garage, what would you call that? Like a
Garage rock.
Garage rock. Yeah, like guys who get together and figure out the instruments with each other and put it together and just make good music. And they don't try to hit the mark all the time. They find the mark.
Yeah.
And you talked a lot about your journey with that, which is, David Grohl and the Foo Fighters are kind of one of my favorite people, because I think they try to continue to do that. They don't bring in a bunch of technicians. They don't spend days writing songs. They just get in there and do it. And it's nice to have you in the studio and know that Maroon 5 started that way.
Yeah, we started it in my parents' garage, really.
That's right.
And none of us were trained musicians. We were all just kids picking up instruments together. And I think part of what made our sound unique, or the way that our chemistry became unique, was because we were just figuring it out as we went.
Yeah.
Together for a decade, really, before Songs About Jane came out. It was just trial and experimentation, just like trying different sounds, different influences, genres, and just pushing and pulling off of each other, to find the way that we would play together. And it was, like you said, not trying to fit into a specific mold, but just allowing it to evolve.
Right.
Which up until a certain point actually was a detriment, because a lot of labels passed on us for that reason, because they said, you're great, you have some catchy songs, and you guys have a really cool, unique chemistry together and a great voice, but we don't know what genre, what format, radio format we would promote you to.
You weren't hitting the mark, but you were making some really good music, and it's a lot riskier doing it that way, because you're not trying to hit these particular, you're not checking the boxes.
Well, if anything, we thought it actually made us, we had more potential for that reason, because if you're like, we're just straight up pop rock, or we're just straight up R&B, or whatever it is, and it's like, you can have a hit if you do well within that genre, but if you want to transcend that genre, you need to do something that is different than what everyone else is doing within that. So we felt being something that was outside of one cookie cutter mold was actually going to give us more staying power.
And man, the imagery of you and Adam Levine being friends at 13, 14, 15 is super cool. Hanging out in LA at that time, where grunge music was kind of the dominant chart music. I still identify with a lot of the Pearl Jam and the all of that stuff that was going on back then. And, can you tell us a little bit about, you talked a little bit about your journey with the band until you were sort of asked to leave the band. And you talked about, a little bit of your journey with drugs and alcohol along the way. Were there any warning signs at that time back then? Were you aware that possibly you were going to run into something down the road, or was music enough, and being successful in music, did it overshadow that?
In terms of the alcohol?
Yeah, and for the use and the addiction that you eventually would face later down the road.
Yeah, I didn't see any signs that it was a problem when I was in the band performing, and I think that on the road we would drink, or I probably drank as much as anyone in the band at that point, which is kind of funny, because earlier on I was the straight edge guy. Me and Mickey, I didn't smoke pot until I was like 23 or something like that. Oh, wow. And I had tried drinking a couple times when I was a teenager, but I was one of those guys. Me and Mickey, we would put an X on our hand, which meant we were straight edge. It was like a punk rock thing to do,
Yeah, yeah.
And our favorite band was Fugazi at that time, and they were like the straight edge band. So, yeah, but when I started drinking in my 20s, it was just fun. It was just tying one on with friends. It was never something I did alone. It was never something I did to the point where it was affecting my life in a negative way. But then when things got dark in my life, when I went through a really hard time, there was a shift. And then it became a coping mechanism. It became something that was an escape.
You talked about that really clearly in the interview. You talked about having this shift in life and not actually having tools, real tools to cope with these things. And I think a lot of people, there's so many variations of what, I'm in recovery. I just turned 14, but I knew at an early, like 13, I was like, I always say I was like a pile of leaves waiting for a match. As soon as I drank, it was off to the races. And then I hear other stories of people finding out later down the road, like yourself, where something turns on them. And maybe you could just talk a little bit more in detail about, that particular spectrum of addiction and recovery. Like, how can people, because I think it's hard for people to accept, like, hey, I've been, getting along with this I've been a rock star, and I've been hanging out in the whiskey and the troubadour since I was 13, but now all of a sudden this thing that has been my friend is now my enemy. And identifying that can be troublesome, don't you think?
Yeah, well, that's why we need to tell all these stories that are different, because that's the insidious nature of drugs and alcohol, right? I mean, sure, if you know when you're 13 that you have a problem, it's like you probably can come to a place of acceptance about it a little quicker.
Oh, it took me longer, but I'm hard at it, man.
Yeah, well, okay. But you hear those stories a lot. You know, it's like there was something within me, and the second I started, I was off to the races. I think the common thread, though, is that you hear both people that it takes a long time for them to understand that they have an issue, and people who know it early on. You hear everyone the same description of this void, something that was always missing or something they were trying to fill up, even if it didn't get to the point of being a problem until later in life.
Right.
I can look back now and realize before drinking ever became a big problem for me, it was something that was filling a void, and there was a feeling that there was something inside of me that was missing, and there was an insecurity, there was an existential angst that I felt.
And at the time, did music and being successful fill that void for you, so you weren't aware?
Yeah. I think that starting the band when I did at age 16 with my best friends really did a lot to kind of give me some purpose, to give me a spiritual connection.
Sure.
It was
a sense of purpose.
A sense of purpose. It brought me out of self. It brought me connected to something larger than myself. And so in a lot of ways, it served that purpose of filling that void. And I think it did for a long time. And so when I lost that, when I had to step away from that, and that big part of my identity and my spiritual center was gone, that's when the void was like super pronounced, and I was really depressed. And I didn't know what to do to fill it up other than just drink to oblivion.
Yeah. Yeah, you told a few stories that reminded me of my last days, and not to say that, like, for me, understanding that I had a problem early on, I put very little energy into the solution for so long. I tried harder a lot, like you said in your interview in the chapter of your book. I just try harder, try to be better at this, try to be better at that, try to be better at this, and putting down something that was filling that was difficult for me to accept at the time. You've come, a long ways. It feels like a very big gap between rock star and family therapist. Hang on a second. I lost it. Wait. Oh. No, you don't know what I was going to say. Oh. Do you still, I did want to ask you one thing. Do you still play music?
I do. I'm finding it harder to have time to do it at this point. It's something that's always a part of me, and I'm always trying to. It's part of my self-care, I think, too.
Do you have a studio? Or?
I do have a studio, and I have all of my gear that I've collected over my lifetime in that room. And if nothing else, I'll just strap on one of my guitars and just strum and sing a song every now and then, just to blow off some steam. Cool. I haven't been able to do anything like professionally with it in some time now, because I have.
You still have a creative need in your life.
Absolutely have a creative need, and that's another reason why writing my book, Harder to Breathe, was very purposeful for me. When I got into that process of writing a book and then editing it and putting it all together, like that was the first time in a long time that I felt the feeling I had when we were making records in the band, where you're just so like inside of something and time has no meaning. You're just wrapped up in it and so passionate about it. And so it was really fulfilling in that way. And he kind of, I think, created a bug in me. It lit a fire. I know I want to do more writing. I know that's going to be a part of my creative process.
I watched Laura do the same thing, and I wouldn't say it's out of control, but it's definitely, I can see the creative spark in it, and but not finding that for so long and then opening that sort of drawer for you is probably really wonderful. Do you and Adam still hang out?
I wouldn't say we hang out. We talk and text with some regularity. So some periods of time will go by we haven't, but then we will, and all of a sudden we'll be chatting like 3 nights in a row, just up late at night texting.
Oh, cool.
And it's just silly. It's just like we're teenagers being goofy and trying to make each other laugh.
That's fantastic.
But with a tinge of more grown-up conversation at the same time now.
Wow. Like Laura said, we are really glad you came down to the studio in the rain today. And I'm really glad to meet you, man. You guys need to check out the book Harder to Breathe. It's available wherever you get books.
Yeah, Amazon or Barnes & Noble.
Right on. And Ryan Dusick at ryandusick.com. And thanks again.
Thank you so much.
All right.